12 years ago. I'd recently heard on the radio that the local Historical Society and Chamber of Commerce were going to dedicate a new exhibit about Cloud Dweller, a great teacher of our people. This troubled me for several reasons. First, the people who designed the exhibit never consulted our community. Second, they did consult the so-called Kalindi Nation, hundreds of miles from here. That organization knows about us, but its leaders don't acknowledge us because they're afraid that doing so might complicate their relationship with the government and diminish their power. And finally, a Chamber of Commerce official who spoke on the radio said, "We're working with the Historical Society on projects to enhance our quality of life and hopefully also help our local businesses. And this is one of those projects." I found it insulting that someone would use the story of our ancestors' teacher to draw customers into Walmart and McDonald's. Several of us felt as though we had to express our disapproval. The president of the Historical Society claimed not to know that there are still people in Jacobs County who traced their ancestry to the Kalindi, who were here in Cloud Dweller's time. She seemed sincere, but surely someone in that historical society had to at least have heard rumors. We even had notices in the newspaper about meetings of our local Kalindi community, which has begun to organize itself in the past few years. Even if they weren't intentionally excluding us, their unawareness of us goes to show that they don't pay enough attention to what happens outside their white middle-class circles. Also, our absence from their history books indicates that they privilege written records too highly over oral transmission, as if nothing really happened unless it was put down on paper. I attended one of their meetings, hoping that we could work together, but it turned out that many of them are motel and store owners who seem more interested in exploiting local history for profit than in actually learning anything from it. Furthermore, they spoke of our history as if it were peripheral to the history of Jacobs County, rather than an integral part of it. Maybe they didn't realize they were doing so, but they were. Not to be uncharitable, but I'm not sure we can trust them. I think we're going to have to work within our own community if we want our history to be represented carefully and respectfully.
Okay, you guys. We're going to do another text vote here, text poll, not vote. Same process, same number. We'll have the options up here in a second, will we? So, Cloud Dweller exhibit, again, the 22333, speech number 1, or speech number 2. Or they're approximately equally consistent or equally inconsistent with my views. So go ahead and we'll do a little poll on this. We'll also do a brief, if anyone's got a fun to watch. Still voting, and we usually about what, 20 votes? Well, it's not moving, so our Historical Society lady gets 1 vote. Speech number 2, Josephine Lai, 9. Approximately either equally consistent or inconsistent with your views. I'd really like to hear an explanation, because this is kind of a tough one for me, so probably a tough one for you guys as well. Anybody want to offer some insight into this? Yeah.
unless there was a overt effort to exclude the Indian people from any discussion, is typical of any public issue that is presented. People don't step up immediately. Joseph Eagle-Eye, that's the point when they should have expressed their interest. Perhaps they were excluded, but if they weren't, that's the opportunity, because there is a process and it has to continue. But to me, that would seem to be.
Yeah, where's your vote on this one?
3.
Number 3. Where's anybody who voted for the number 1? I'm always looking for the minority view here and try to figure out why we want to offer that. Okay, how about we got most of the votes then from speech number 2, Joseph Eagle-Eye. Somebody want to explain that? Why that resonates perhaps a little more? Anybody? There we go.
I'm a history major. I'm a history major at SIU with a minor in Native American Studies. And the Native Americans are often left out of anything to do with their heritage. And I think that's wrong.
Okay, we'll do a couple more.
Well, you'd be surprised if this happens way more often than you possibly could imagine. And usually, the reason why is that, it's like this lady said, they've been left out, and it takes a situation to bring it to the forefront for people to even do a lot of soul searching to see themselves that they were part of some cultural group of people that have been excluded. So it's not, it happens more.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into this, but an effort to maybe offer how this might be handled, because if I remember correctly, the Historical Society dealt with who they thought were the proper representatives of the descendants of the tribe. So it wasn't like they had a sense of leaving them out. How would you move forward, I guess, on something like this? Because the past is done. I don't know if anybody wants to offer that. How you deal with that? Anybody?
Yeah, you can, when you hear the other side's story, according to the speech, the governmental, the people that, the non-Indian folks went to and said, okay, we excluded you, we didn't know you were there, so. It seems to me that if they had their chance to do like that gentleman said, we are.
Yeah, I think, I may say this question if we have time for it. How do you cover yourself when you deal with these things? Because very often you do hear about them, I think, after the fact. Do you want to have a brief comment on this?
Just, I think Joseph Eagle-Eye should join the Historical Society from the get-go. And the Historical Society probably should have made a major effort to set up an advisory board or something like that, making sure the stakeholders that are making the decisions of the Historical Society are equally represented around the community, not just people from the Chamber of Commerce and things like that, but really who are the voices in your community and how can we hear them. So it can go both ways, and they're both equally wrong.
Yeah, and I think too, because I know a lot of you folks have done this, but when you deal with any group's politics, you can't win, right? And if I remember correctly, the one tribe says we don't recognize them. So if you're in the middle and you're dealing with people that the other people don't recognize, how do you do that? I have a feeling you guys have probably dealt with this before. But I want to move on to our next. This is a lot of fun. Next pair of speeches is called Davidson Farm.
I am Jim Caston, Economic Development Specialist with the City of Ricksville, a medium-sized industrial town. We're disappointed that the state of New Saxon has closed Davidson Farm, a historic site on the outskirts of Ricksville, and won't sell it to a private firm so that it can reopen. Davidson Farms began as the estate of a prominent early settler, Henry Davidson. Although this was a free state, some farmers were coerced and legal loopholes to use to keep African American indentured servants in conditions resembling slavery for their entire lives. Mr. Davidson was one of them. We consider it important to honor the memories of those African Americans and teach people about this sad chapter in our history. Henry Davidson's son operated the farm himself, but his grandchildren partitioned it into tenant farms. The poet Ellen Croft and the rhythm and blues guitarist Floyd Barnett were raised on the Davidson farm property as children of tenant farmers. In 1974, the Davidson family heirs, who lived far away by then, decided that the profits they were receiving from the tenant farmers were too small to be worth the trouble. They sold the property to an entrepreneur who was interested in developing tourist attractions. He made it into a living history farm, hired reenactors to give demonstrations of the agricultural and past years. He installed exhibits about the farm's unfortunate history of indentured labor and about the famous artist who'd grown up there. It was a good educational resource. School classes often took field trips. People from surrounding areas who wanted to learn what farm life was like for their grandparents visited as well. So did admirers of Ellen Croft and Floyd Barnett. The property produced revenue for the city of Ricksville, and the visitors generated income for local businesses. When the owner retired in 1996, the State Heritage Commission bought Davidson Farm. At first, the commission maintained it well, but they gradually cut the budget. They had fewer and fewer events there. 4 years ago, they closed it altogether. They say they'll reopen it as soon as their budget situation improves. They tell us they don't want to sell it to the business people who've expressed interest in buying it because it might become too commercialized and the quality of interpretation might suffer. Well, maybe, but we suspect that they're embarrassed to admit that something like slavery existed in this supposedly free state. Also, those people live in the state capital, 250 miles away, and really don't understand our culture, our economy, or our needs. As it stands now, no one is learning anything, and no one is earning anything from Davidson Farm. Let someone buy it and reopen it to the public.
I'm Jane Shevsky, Director of Cultural Interpretation for the New Saxony Heritage Foundation. The Economic Development Department in Ricksville is urging us to sell Davidson Farm to a private buyer. I understand their reasoning, but I strongly oppose it. We're as eager as they are to reopen it to the public, but it should be done in the right way. Unfortunately, we don't have the money to do that right now, and the motives of those who do are questionable at best. The property is surrounded by industrial blight on one side and commercial sprawl on the other. Our friends in Ricksville say, we can stipulate that the property must remain a historic site as a condition of the sale. True, but if the new owner's lawyers find a way around that stipulation after the property is sold, it could be gobbled up by commercial interests and lost to the public forever. Even if the private firm that buys Davidson Farm does maintain it as a historic site, there's no guarantee that it will hire qualified cultural specialists to interpret it. When the farm was in private hands in the 70s through the 90s, the quality of the interpretation was disgraceful. Half of the historical claims made by the reenactors and exhibits were either totally inaccurate or wildly exaggerated to grab the audience's attention. By the time the owner retired, he'd added carnival rides. It wasn't a living history farm. It was an amusement park. Some claim that we're embarrassed to admit that something resembling slavery was practiced here in what was officially a free state. On the contrary, we completely agree that the story should be told, but it ought to be told truthfully and thoughtfully. To sensationalize that history for economic gain is to exploit the misfortune of the African Americans who suffered through it. The previous private owner of Davidson Farm claimed that he wanted visitors to hear the real story, but he encouraged his tour guides to tell bizarre stories that had little or no basis in reality. Some of the souvenirs that he sold in his gift shop were downright racist. Floyd Barnett and Ellen Croft were great artists, certainly, but there are exhibits about them at the town museum, and there are even streets named after them. so it's not as if their memories are being neglected. Look, I regret that our budget woes are preventing us from keeping Davidson Farm in operation, but they'll be over sooner or later. I'd regret it much more if we were to sell it to someone who would ruin it permanently for a quick buck. Our friends in Ricksville would too, whether they realize it or not.